and thank you, Cody, for the introduction to our forum today. So real briefly, going over today's agenda, I'll be presenting sort of an overview of our 2015 Climate Action Plan, moving into a brief presentation about our vision for Our Climate, Our Future, the update to the city's Climate Action Plan, and then we'll enter into a more interactive portion of our programming today, our first breakout discussion, which will be for 20 minutes, taking a 5-minute break, and then entering into our second round of breakout discussions. And then we'll finish today's meeting coming back together as a group for some open dialogue. Next slide, please. So starting off with our current Climate Action Plan, as Cody mentioned, it was adopted in December of 2015 with unanimous bipartisan support. Our city's Climate Action Plan serves as mitigation for the general plan, which means it's considered qualified, also generally referred to as legally binding. The commitment set forth within the city's Climate Action Plan is to reduce or avoid 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2035, and that's based off of what they were in the year 2010. There are 5 strategies that are identified within the Climate Action Plan in order to achieve that greenhouse gas emission reduction, and those are energy and water efficiency, clean and renewable energy, mobility, zero waste, and resiliency. Next slide. Each year, our city sustainability department publishes an annual report on progress of implementation of the city's Climate Action Plan. And within that annual report, we publish an inventory of our greenhouse gas emissions. This chart represents the inventories that have been completed since 2015, and those are the blue dots you see on the left-hand side of this chart. It also includes a solid orange line that runs the length of the chart sort of towards the top there, and that is our 2010 baseline. And then the blue dotted line towards the bottom are our projections for where we anticipated our greenhouse gas emissions would be when the CAP was developed in 2015. And so this is showing us that we are slightly ahead of achieving our targets that were set forth in the CAP for 2020. Next slide. In addition to our greenhouse gas emission inventory, we also publish a status of each CAP action. So of the 5 strategies that I mentioned, they are all made up of several actions that have greenhouse gas emission reduction associated with them. And so for a few examples of what those actions are, they are things like reducing our residential energy use citywide, achieving a 100% renewable energy goal, also citywide, increasing our mode share for our commuters of transit, walking, and bicycling, and decreasing the amount of single occupancy vehicle drivers that we have commuting to work, diverting our solid waste from entering our landfill, and increasing our urban tree canopy coverage. For anyone who's interested, you can find more details on each action and the annual report at our website. Next slide. So we're going to try to keep things a little bit interactive. This is a bit of a long meeting. So if everyone can open up a new browser or either on your computer or your phone, and head over to menti.com, menti.com, and enter in the code 197348. We wanted to just ask a few questions before we start discussing the update to the city's Climate Action Plan, starting with when you imagine a sustainable San Diego, what comes to mind? And so as you enter answers into the Menti website, they will populate here for the rest of the group to see. How do I get a new page? Excellent, thank you. These are some great things to think about. So zero carbon looks like it's, and I believe the way this works is the more that somebody, or the more that folks enter in the same responses, the larger they appear in the word jumble. It's a lot of clean air, green, lots of trees, equitable, excellent. And so using this, I don't think you have to change your code. So the same code, what changes do you want to see for those who are familiar with the Climate Action Plan? What changes do the Climate Action Plan support in your ocean water? And so it looks like Scott is asking what the code is. It's 197348. Electrify everything, access to the trolley, zero carbon, better transit, more inclusive. Great. More emphasis on regenerative systems. And then I think we have one last question, Maya. What climate change impacts concern you the most? Air quality. I see sea level rise popping up quite a few times. Severe weather. Air pollution in EJ communities. Water shortages, definitely always a concern in the southwestern portion of the US. Impacts on communities of color, sea level rise and heat waves, new disease, loss of biodiversity, inequities. Okay, so thank you all for taking a moment to provide some initial feedback on some of our high level questions. So moving into our vision for what we're branding Our Climate, Our Future, which is the update to the city's Climate Action Plan. At the onset of this process, we're at the very beginning of this process, we're setting forth sort of 3 priorities to help guide the framework for its development. The first being setting a more ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goal over a longer period of time, so looking beyond the year 2035. Centering the Climate Action Plan around climate equity and quantification and more connection to those additional benefits of climate actions beyond greenhouse gas emission reductions. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, we are at the very beginning portion of this project. So this is an overview of our current timeline. And we are essentially in that giant blue bubble on the left, the learning phase, and taking in a lot of feedback and setting, sort of like I mentioned, the framework and the priorities for moving this process forward. Throughout the end of this calendar year and into the early portions of next year, we will be drafting or creating a document to then move into sharing and making that public for additional feedback and revisions as necessary. To ensure, and that will happen in early 2021, to ensure that when we're ready to enter into the the act phase of this process, which for us will look like City Council approving a new climate action plan, that the CAP really reflects the priorities and the needs of San Diegans. Next slide. So taking a moment to sort of go a little deeper on those three priorities I mentioned regarding our vision for our climate, our future. The first being setting forth a more ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction goal within the climate action plan. This graph serves as sort of a visual representation of what that looks like now, sort of what the landscape is. And so I'm going to walk through it. And so on the far left, you see 4 black dots, and each of those dots represent a greenhouse gas emission inventory that was conducted by the city through our annual reporting process. So that's sort of where we are today, or our most recent piece of data shows us where we are. The green dots on this graph represent the targets that are within our existing climate action plan. And the black dotted line demonstrates the projection of where our greenhouse gas emissions will be over time. And that projection includes local, regional, and state level actions. And then you'll see it sort of flat lines, if you will, in the year 2035. And that's basically due to most policies at all those levels sort of going out into that time frame, and then additional actions needing to be identified. On the left-hand side of this graph, you'll see it's a little bit covered up, but it's a red dot, and that represents the state's 2050 greenhouse gas emission reduction goal. Well, at the same time, an executive order was issued by Governor Brown in 2018 that the state should achieve a zero carbon economy by the year 2045, and where that would land is essentially at the bottom of this graph, would be 0. And so that space underneath the black dotted line that I mentioned earlier, the projection, to the bottom of this graph is what we refer to as the gap. And the gap is the area where additional actions and strategies need to be identified and move forward in order to achieve a more aggressive or ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction goal. And when I am speaking to actions and strategies, I'm referring to those that the local, regional, and state level entities are able to move forward. And so it's a combination of all three. Next slide. Centering climate equity in the next iteration of the city's climate action plan. So in 2019, the city of San Diego, in partnership with our community-based organizations, developed the first ever climate equity index. And what the climate equity index does is it measures relative access to opportunity across the city of San Diego at the census tract level. We have come to understand that our low to very low access to opportunity areas are San Diego's communities of concern. And so moving forward in this process, we need to start with the development, and we are working on the development of a community-focused engagement process that prioritizes communities of concern in partnership with community-based organizations that represent those areas. Next slide. Lastly, discussing those additional benefits, or sometimes they're referred to as co-benefits of climate action. And these are these are benefits that essentially go beyond greenhouse gas emission reduction. So that is the priority of a climate action plan. And these, for some examples of what we're discussing when we're talking about additional benefits, we're looking at things like improved air quality, greater access to active and healthy lifestyles or promotion of, safer routes for walking and bicycling, savings on utility bills and transportation costs, workforce development and quality jobs, and the improvement of natural spaces. Though I'm sure that there are others that folks may want to identify and discuss possibly today during our breakout sessions.
someone answer the question that was in chat about the whether the franchise agreement has any is playing a part at all, the new franchise agreement, as that's a current issue that will be coming up pretty quickly? Any response to that as far as the sustainability department, et cetera?
Yeah, so that's a project sort of happening in a different space, if you will, as separate from the climate action plan update.
But it does have implications for the climate action plan. So that's why the question was posed. Are you thinking about that? Are you participating in that process? Because the terms of that agreement may indeed impact the ability to achieve certain aspects of the plan.
Yeah, so definitely part of the consideration of the development of the new document, and that's great feedback for us to, take forward in this process. And so just keep reminding folks, we are at sort of the very beginning, and so getting feedback like that of pay attention or prioritize rather the franchise fee agreement while looking at the climate action plan and maybe better connecting those two things, like that's definitely what we're hosting these meetings to sort of get a better understanding of what the community wants to see through this process.
And how does it affect the community choice energy?
That I'm unable to speak to. I'm not entirely sure how the franchise fee affects CCA, but
we do have a couple more questions if we can try and get to them in our last 3 minutes. Melissa Elder, if you would like to speak.
Hi there. Yeah, I was just wondering about what the plan is to incorporate potentially the environmental racism and the experiences with emissions in neighborhoods that are near sources of emissions, and thinking about how we're tracking air quality and like how that impacts those communities of concern.
Hey, Melissa, thank you for your question. And so looking deeper into the air quality perspective as it relates to climate action really falls under that umbrella of additional benefits or co-benefits. And so bringing more of a quantitative assessment of what that looks like as it relates to these actions is where we'll be looking to address more from an air quality point of view.
Thanks, Ashley.
Okay. One more question, I think. Cody Harrison has raised her hand, or his hand.
Yeah, so I asked this in the chat a little bit above and would love to hear, an answer on it. So I'm curious, there's an IPCC special report on land use and climate change. And in that report, the IPCC makes clear that there are a number of non-GHG pressure points for stabilizing local climate, such as they say that wetter soil decreases the severity of heat waves with a high confidence, and that increased vegetation reduces regional warming with medium confidence. And there are a whole bunch of others that are in there, but I'm just curious, why aren't these making it into the climate action plan? I'm not seeing them anywhere.
Yeah, so, go ahead, Melanie.
Can I respond? Just in the first iteration, you'll see there is a very beginnings of including that in the first iteration, which is the urban tree planting. That's one way of increasing the tree coverage and so on, which would address some of those things. But the whole state of California is only now looking at natural and working land. So we'll be following that and see what we can implement or use from that for the update.
Okay, thank you. I mean, because when I see, even when natural lands come in, it's still mostly from a GHG perspective, and this report makes it clear that there are other impacts to these natural systems besides, with regard to climate, besides just greenhouse gases. So I just want to, see more of that.
You're right, and that's what Ashley was saying earlier, that we will be looking at the co-benefits. Whether we can quantify those or not, that's different, but we will be identifying co-benefits such as those. That's what we're calling it. Because we're looking at this primarily from a GHG, but we could also look at it the other way around. resilience, and then what are the GHG benefits. But we're doing it starting from the GHG. So but we will definitely be looking at those more closely this time.
Okay, thank you.
Had another question. I guess post-COVID, do you plan to hold more of these Zoom sessions, because it's really beneficial, because it's easier for me to dial in than having to drive down to your office to participate in any public forum session. So I guess my feedback is it would be great if you could continue to hold these Zoom sessions in future.
Thank you. That's excellent feedback. And we do anticipate doing more of these throughout the second half of 2020. And we'll be updating our website, which is currently up on the screen, sandiego.gov/sustainability, to announce future events. So please keep an eye on that. Also, if you haven't yet, at that website, you can find a link to our survey for the Climate Action Plan update. And at the end of that survey, you have the option to include your email so that we can send out, we can include you on your monthly newsletter list, which will also announce any future events relating to the CAP update. So please feel free to go over and take that survey if you haven't already.
And is the scope of the Climate Action Plan specific to the city of San Diego, or does it include the county of San Diego?
Yeah, so this Climate Action Plan is within the jurisdiction of the city of San Diego only.
So what's being done at the county level?
So that is a great question. I don't know if you want to take a minute to answer it, Ashley, but we are.
No, I think we're good there. And just to wrap up on that, I would just encourage you to reach out to the folks at the county or other cities if you're interested, just trying to find out more specifics about what they're doing. But a lot of other municipalities have climate action plans as well, and opportunities to engage.
We have Ann Sheridan who has a question. Go ahead, Ann.
So we're actually at time. So definitely thank you guys so much for your participation. This has been such a great event, and it's been so nice to, see how this works virtually and see how we can make these events work even with everything that's going on in the world. We will be saving all of the information that we gathered through Mentimeter, through the chat, and through this presentation itself. But please, if you have any other questions for us that are more immediate, you can use the email on the screen, sustainability@sandiego.gov, to ask any of those questions. We will have more of these forums, either through Zoom or, depending on what the future holds, maybe not in person, but go to sandiego.gov and sustainability, and then sign up for our newsletter so that you can stay engaged and be alerted for more opportunities like this. And with that, I think we can close.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.